Hello and welcome to Ask a CFO, a brand spanking new podcast series brought to you by the Treasury Today Group. In this new series, I'll be shining a light on the different paths taken to become Chief Financial Officer. I'm Sophie Jackson, and I'm so excited to be with you on this new adventure, learning more about the personal journeys and professional development of CFOs across the world. Our first episode features Yang Zhu, CFO of the Straumann Group. Yang Zhu is a dear friend of both mine and of the Treasury Today Group. We first met in person sometime before the pandemic, and she really has supported our Women in Treasury initiative so much. She's spoken on panels with me around diversity and equity in Las Vegas at Kyriba Live and London for our own Women in Treasury forum. She is really just such a pleasure and a delight to be around and to speak with. She's an incredibly thoughtful and intuitive person who leads with kindness and has inspired me so much in many different ways. She recently became CFO of the Straumann Group in Switzerland after a formidable run in Treasury at Kraft Heinz with roles in the US and Amsterdam. A Chinese native who has mastered success in business while working in a second language and often in different cultures, she really does typify for me a new sort of leader, one that I am thrilled to see thriving and am proud to be able to showcase with you all today.
Hi, Sophie.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you? Let me see. Yes, and now it works. Good. Okay. Excellent. I'm so glad to see you. How are you?
Yeah, very good, thank you. Very good. So first of all, if you could just introduce yourself and your current role for me.
My name is Yang Zhu. I'm the Global CFO of Straumann Group.
Fantastic. So I want to take us all the way back now to the beginning of your path. So tell me about your early days. Where did you grow up? And what were your early years like?
I was born and raised in a small city in China, southwest China, in a place where even many Chinese wouldn't necessarily know or go. So my whole families are actually still there. I got the great fortune to be the first child in the generation that could go to university. So I went to a much bigger city in China for my undergrad. And then thereafter, extremely fortunate to get a full scholarship. That's where the journey started. I went to France for my postgraduate, and after that got hired by multinationals. That's all the beginning of my international path, I guess.
Wow. And I mean, I want to ask you what made you think about finance. But first, I'm going to ask you, what was that like to be the first person?
The family was extremely proud. I remember we didn't have much means, but my parents still threw a dinner party. We invited many friends and family members. And my father was, for the first time in his life, that he gave a speech, in public in front of his friends and relatives. That was something remarkable. But for me, at that time, I instantly felt the duty of making them proud, the duty of making something out of my life, to not let down that expectation.
Yeah, because I was just thinking that as much as that is so amazing to feel so special, that is a real burden of responsibility, because it's not just your ambitions that you're carrying with you then, it's the ambitions of your entire family, right? That must feel like a lot of pressure.
Very true, very true. However, I also think it's a responsibility. I don't feel it's necessarily a burden, because also I think the inner drive also matters, because I was, from the very beginning, there was not much expectation. Actually, the expectation is perhaps she would grow up into a local teacher, So nobody was dreaming, myself included, although I wanted, nobody was dreaming that I could go outside of China.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting you say that, because when I went to university, I was the first from my mother's side to go to university, and it was very, very exciting for everybody. And I always thought, there's a lot of pressure when you're the one that people think is clever and, you're supposed to do well and so on. But then I remember when I got to university, one of my very good friends His family were all like doctorates who'd all gone to Cambridge. And so him going to like a top 10 university in the world that wasn't Cambridge was considered a disappointment. And I suddenly realized that actually coming from a family that has been incredibly successful makes it quite hard to stand out and feel special. So for you, you started off your whole journey feeling like so special and like everyone's proud of you. And I think that gives you a lot of energy to achieve things. So what led you, or what made you even think about a career in finance? Like, how did that all start out?
I guess I had always been a little bit, how do I say this? The math came pretty intuitive to me. And so when I went to the university in the bigger city of China, there were many choices. And at that time, in the 90s, either computer science or finance was considered like good major. So I kind of stumbled into finance because I was definitely I didn't own a computer. I didn't never try in my life. So that for me was too foreign. So I chose finance, and especially the major career name of international finance. So it feels like even more, aspirational and could take me somewhere. So that's why I applied for that major. I got in, and I fell in love. And then, of course, when you continue the study, when you work, and people often relate your major to what the next career, the first beginning of the job that could be. So that's where I stuck in finance and multiple different places in finance, put that way, bigger finance function.
Fabulous. And then are there any individuals that you can point out as having been very important in that early stage of you getting involved in a career in finance?
Once upon a time, among the early career was working in Belgium. I was in the European and Asian Treasury Center. Take back to our old times of Treasury. I remember the global treasurer, he was located in the US because that's where the headquarters is. He came from the US and he saw something in me. He probably saw that I had some learning agility. I really tried my best I know how. Then he wanted to move me from Europe to US. And that's where I started my really international career, because once you graduate from Europe, you find a job in Europe, and many of my friends are still in there. But then he took me from Europe to the US. And that was a big trust in me, because I was only a couple of years in, and also a change of environment, and also putting me in a much larger role. And for the first time that, I didn't know that I could do that, but someone saw and someone took a risk in you. So for this, I'm forever indebted to him.
Amazing. I think it so often is that fragile, isn't it? There's one or two people that really push you. I think particularly for women, but I mean, I don't want to go too much into that, but yeah, I think that you need those people that see a spark in you at the beginning, especially.
Yeah.
So tell me, I mean, you mentioned there, obviously we're Treasury Today Group and you do have a background in Treasury. So what career history led you to that role that you've got now of CFO? And what was it that attracted you to the role?
My very beginning was starting with smallest treasury, so like cash management, FX, then became, when I was in the US, there was a huge acquisition. So I was managing the integration on the treasury front. But later I thought, I want to explore some general business finance. So I actually hopped out of treasury for a long time. And then I did all kinds of business partnership type of finance role. So it could be in marketing, in sales, in business units, in a product category, and so on and so forth. So that those kind of generalist of finance path also took me, from the US back to Europe, then further into Asia Pacific. And it just helped me to be able to connect the dots, because I think in global functions, you see certain things a certain way. In local functions or in business functions, you see other things. So over time, not by design, intentional design, just by curiosity, I was able to go multiple places, multiple areas. And whenever I was in a business finance, as example, my curiosity was such where when I was a finance person supporting marketing, I actually sit down with the marketeers because I wanted to learn how they do briefing. So those things over time took me actually outside of finance for a brief period of time that I was doing sales and marketing. Then later, I even did some roles like HR, strategy, some roles even involving IT. Again, it's not my forte, but I could help with prioritization and resourcing. So I think having a broad perspective of business in general is very helpful to where I am today.
What do you think that equips you with? Is it a respect and understanding of each function? Is it more being able to have general oversight? What things does that give you?
The first basic one is you have a general empathy and appreciation of people in different functions. Because oftentimes, if I were only to grow up in one function, I wouldn't necessarily know what the day-to-day challenges the salespeople are facing, or what production, if they have a back order, how I can help from a financial lens, how I can see the problem, I can help them to prioritize and surgically solve a problem. And also helps me to connect the dots much faster geographically. So because now I'm in a global company, you can see the geographic variances in terms of growth dynamics, or functionally in terms of how the end-to-end process would look like. And that helps me as a global CFO to be able to allocate resources and capital in a way that is, oftentimes I don't need to be convinced because I know I've been there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting that you said that it gives you empathy. You used that word empathy, because I think you are one of the most empathetic leaders that I know. And I think aside from it being a good tool in being able to understand people, it also attracts people to you. I think it's a very rare leadership skill that we talk about. We don't think about it as being something that is like magnetic to people, but it really is. Like kindness as an outward lead trait is incredibly important. And I think one that, if we look back on, like when I was growing up, the kind of early 90s business leaders were the exact opposite. And it just makes you feel like you never want to work for them. You never want to be around anybody like that. And you don't want anything to do with that business. So I think that's something that's worth pointing out.
Well, I still have to say, like you said, when we're growing up, the leadership feature is always extremely assertive, extremely serious. They will never stop by to say hello and to ask how the family is going. And for a long time, even for my own leadership style, I was trying to mimic that. I was asking myself, am I being serious enough? Am I being assertive enough? Am I being authoritative enough? Then over time, as more you grow, you are much more aware of who you are. And you say, well, you get what you see. And if I have been effective this far, something must be working. So don't try to be someone else. I'm not.
Absolutely. And I think when I was younger, it was the same. I was once told I was too nice for the business that I was in at the time. And I think that's so bad. Like, you should never mistake kindness for weakness. And you could be very kind, but as long as you have firm boundaries, I think that's the two that are the killer combination, is kindness plus strong personal boundaries, so that people learn to respect you as well as to appreciate your empathy. I want us to think about the journey that you've been on and what that's looked like. So what would you say some of the biggest challenges and some of the successes have been in your career so far?
The biggest challenge for me is I always change. There's always something new, some project, some new country or geography I need to go. And as you grow up the ranking, the problems become bigger that you need to solve. And I always have to learn and unlearn and relearn. And let me give you an example. When I changed from a company to another, it was similar size as 20-something billion in terms of revenue. But I was a little bit naive when I get into the newer company. I thought it was more or less the same thing. That's particularly true, if you have lived in the first company for 15 years. So naturally, you bring with you a lot of unsaid understanding of how a corporate of this size should work. But, I was wrong. Completely wrong. The company culture was completely different. The pace was completely different. And the bottom line driven versus consensus is completely the polar opposite. For the first time, I was opening my eyes and asking myself, can I survive? What do I need to change to fit in? And yes, so those are the things that I think you give yourself a kick. You throw yourself into an ocean and you see if you swim or sink. If you don't give yourself sinking is an option, it's just to swim. And once you can swim, and actually it's a boost of confidence. You say, oh, I can.
Wow, amazing. Okay, I love that. And then you mentioned there changing organization and the kind of, shall we say, learning curve, the sharp learning curve that can bring. But I also think that every industry sector is very unique. So I'm wondering if you could tell me how you think that previous industry sectors that you've worked in have affected the function that you've had.
A lot of differences. So in industries where growth is stagnating, where consolidation has already happened, there's a lot of two things, I think. One is a lot of soul searching in terms of where do I take this portfolio to if my main business is hitting a plateau. Okay, so it's a lot of portfolio rethinking and shaping and searching for the next path of growth. So this is number one. As strategically, there's a lot of, then therefore, how do we capital allocate? Do I return to shareholders or do I invest in where to grow? Okay. So this is one strategic question that typically in industries where you're very big and you're not necessarily growing. Number two, then the focus is how do I run the organization as lean as possible, as efficient as possible? So there's a lot of cost top of mind. There's a lot of processes. There's a lot of lean exercise to continuously improve on that front. Now, in certain different industries where growth is paramount, the industry itself is growing, the sector is growing, and the company itself is growing, either in line or even by outpacing. The thoughts are more, how do I capitalize the growth? Where do I invest? I always think the finance function, the most important job is how to capital allocate. So it's where do you spend the money where you can capitalize and to the growth trend. Not necessarily you have to be cost mindful, but cost is not your first enemy. It's growth. It's how do you distort your resources so you can grow even faster and in a responsible way.
Yeah, amazing. And then one thing I wanted to ask you was, I think there are a lot of preconceptions when you hit those top roles like CFO. There can be a lot of preconceptions about what that role is. So now that you are a CFO, what aspects were what you were expecting? And was there anything that was a surprise to you about what it's like to be a CFO?
First of all, I think CFOs come from different background. There are CFOs coming from controls or accounting. There are CFOs come from business partners. There are CFOs come from treasury. So many paths can lead to CFO. I don't think there's a necessarily one defined model. And nowadays, I think CFOs are much, much more digital aware, much more digital agile. So just to say that, because oftentimes I get the question like, how can you become a CFO? I don't necessarily have the same path. Can I be? The answer is yes, you have your own path. There's no one model. For me, then therefore it comes from me like it's more personal. Like for me, what CFO means for me because of the skill set I bring and the experiences I lived. For me, CFOs is first and foremost a business person. I really need to understand the business inside out as a business person. Therefore, I can be effective in my role. And secondarily, CFO is also a functional expert. I see things through numbers. I risk manage and I put capital in the place where it matters. So then I needed to know my numbers and know the financial insights extremely well so I can steer the business. And the third, I am also a functional leader. I need to be the cheerleader. I needed to be the vision co-creator along with my team and to give guidance and inspiration and help to my team. That's also important. And number 4, the linkage to the external world. So there's always an element of you're talking to external stakeholders, the shareholders, the credit investors, and the regulators, so on and so forth. It's important that we carry those duties. So for me, those are the four folds, and they are intertwined. Ultimately, you have to be a business leader, functional expert, and leader for your team, and the external connector. Those are the four elements of a CFO.
Amazing. And then the first interview that I conducted for this series was with a man called Eric Ball, who used to be the treasurer of Oracle for a very long time on the West Coast. And he said to me that what took him by surprise, he was a CFO, but not for that long. He actually didn't enjoy it. And now he runs a VC fund investing in AI that specifically affects treasury on the West Coast. And he said that what he found different was when he was in his previous role, he could be a real specialist. And that when you became a CFO, you had to become more of a generalist in some ways and work with a lot of different departments. And so I'm wondering if that suited you absolutely perfectly in some ways, because you've had that experience that you told me about at the beginning of this conversation in almost every function. You know, you mentioned HR, IT, like treasury, all these different areas of the business. So in some ways, this was like, you know, the perfect role for you. Is that how you feel?
I also have many friends that came from a specialist path that they became a CFO. I think, yes, it's inevitable that you have to understand the business. You have to be a generalist because you have your anchor where you are really strong at. But ultimately, you've got to broaden up so that you can have the dialogue with your peers who are salespeople, marketing people, product development people, logistic people. You have to have that breadth so you can architect things a little bit behind through the financial angle. Now, I also think, for example, I also spent many years later in my career in treasury. Actually, right before this role, or right before I became a CFO, my most recent was global treasurer plus the head of strategy, and also certain finance functions also roll into me. I would say in all functions, because we're finance people, in all subdivisions of finance, I would say, you can always use that as vehicle or catalyst to broaden. So when I was in treasury, I see foreign exchange for a very, very simple example at the very beginning of my career. Then I know which flow from where to where, and therefore which companies are more sales, which companies are struggling, therefore they need liquidity. So there's always an angle from a finance. I always say finance or operations are two functions you can see things across. Finance, wherever finance functions we are, we can always see the broader company. If we're curious, if we want to ask the third and fourth question, you always get something. And operations, the same thing, because you see things from end to end. So we're in a unique position that you can always, even if we're a functional expert, we can always broaden up.
Absolutely. And I should have thought as well, given the background that we've all got right now of everything that's going on in the world right now, that ability to be learning new things and not resting on your past experiences and the fact that you are a specialist is so integral for everyone that's in business right now. Like, who knows how much everyone's business is going to have to transition, evolve, and kind of face enormous challenges in the coming years.
Yeah, the change is the only constant, right? So that's why, since we cannot change it, and many times the change is a headwind, take it head on and use it as a learning curve. I always say, and it's funny that you say that, I always take all roles as a paid training. I get to learn this, and at the same time, I get paid. It's excellent.
I love that. And then something I wanted to speak with you about as well is how you see the role of the CFO changing. I mean, you mentioned there how much you need to be a digital strategist in many ways, but obviously the role is evolving quite rapidly at the moment. What skills would you say are needed to become a leading modern CFO, and how has that changed?
I read an article in the recent past, and it was describing and stereotyping a little, but just describing the evolution of a CFO. Maybe 2 decades ago, the CFOs have really a lot of accounting background, and which is really necessary, but particularly when you think about the risk management compliance, it really comes with the job. You really need to know. And of course, with the Sarbanes-Oxley and everything, that's even more prominent. So board oftentimes at that time looking for CFOs, and often the first questions is, do you have a CPA? And then later in the stage where you go through financial recession and so on and so forth, and the cost, like CFO really know how to tackle the cost, becomes a major trend because it was necessary during that economic phase. And in the more recent time, and people start saying, oh, I actually need a CFOs to become my business partner. So when you see this many of job description of, hey, CFOs as business partners and well-rounded experiences would be helpful. And now more and more, when you look at the CFOs, the requirement at large is, what would the CFO be able to help me as a company, me as an industry, and also its finance functions to be much more digital adoption of technology because of the phase we're in. I mean, AI, everyone talk about AI, everyone talk about the technology adoption, everyone talk about the ERP, next generation of ERP. So those things come because of where the global trend is, and that's forced evolution of the CFO role.
Absolutely. And is there any advice that you would offer now to those starting out their career or aspiring to become a future CFO? And I would just add to that as well. Did you have like a set path that you had these ticks for yourself of, I want to get to this stage, then I want to get to this stage, and I want to get to this stage? Do you think it's important to plan strategically like that? Or do you think it's more a question of kind of slalom skiing down a mountain and going from thing to thing? Like, what's your advice?
I wish hindsight I could say I had been strategic, but I was not. As I said, I came from very humble background. My true desire in so many roles was, can I learn something different? And no, I didn't plan for all those. But when opportunity presents itself, I always say, if it's something new for me, a new challenge, either it's a different country, either it's a different role, I always go for it. And certain times it's only parallel move. And certain times I remember, and it was like, oh, my friends is growing up so fast, and am I behind? No, I don't regret any of those because I learned more. I only knew I wanted to become a CFO much, much later in the stage, because when you look up, you say, I could. But otherwise, I was so far away down the rank. I would only think about, how can I learn something new? How can I climb a little bit higher? And that was it. So my advice to younger generations or younger version, even more myself, is just to say, put yourself out there to learn as much as you can, take as much risk as you can. You will never know what is going to serve you, but I guarantee you it will serve you.
Absolutely. And then there's just two follow-up questions I want to ask on that, because it's something I think about often. So first of all, you have had these amazing experiences of moving and relocating and so on, and taking on, I guess, big challenges, new roles with an element of risk involved. Is that something you would recommend? Do you think that was important for your success?
It is. It's more the matter of kicking us out of the comfort zone, because not everyone, not every company, not every role would be able to say, well, in 2 years, I can see you go to Hong Kong, another 2 years, go to Sao Paulo. It's still very few. The opportunities are very few. But it's the mindset of, I can be comfortable in what I do, but yet I choose to get out of that because there's something to be learned and something that I can re-approve, re-energize myself. And this is a mindset I think will be helpful.
Yeah, and I think I would add that, because the other question I wanted to ask you about was how important ambition is, and how important it is to really be confident, I guess, and push yourself. Because I think sometimes I see people who have so much potential, but because they don't believe that much in their capabilities, they're kind of treading water in some ways. But back to your point around moving and these risks and challenges, I also think fully immersing yourself in something that's so difficult, like moving, equips you with this skill set of grit and like self-awareness. And I think both of those are so important when it comes to being successful and leading a business, because we're all going to need a lot of grit in order to thrive in modern society. So I'll just come back. So that was a long question. How important do you think it is to be ambitious and to push yourself?
As I said at the very beginning of my career, I didn't dream that it could be a CFO. And I have to say, every time when you kick yourself out of the comfort zone and you were still able to achieve something that you feel proud, over time, it builds upon the confidence to do something you didn't know. It's like a little kid, right? You could not walk or talk. But the more that you try, you fail, but you try, and it gives you a lot of confidence. And this is a try and failure and error and learning, and it gives you the confidence over time that builds upon each other. And ambition is not, maybe some people just are born with a humongous ambition, but without the grits and a try and error and with the confidence knowing that you can be, I think that's more difficult to realize that ambition, despite the fact that people would have that ambition. So I think it's like Lego blocks, but if you don't actively build your own Lego block, either that's experience or confidence or exposure or presence, whatever that needs to be, it's very difficult to say one day I can make the jump from where I am today to where I want to be.
Yeah, and also it needs to be based in like a reality of your capabilities as well, like not a delusion. So yeah, I like that. And I love this image of like the child that's learning new skill sets and getting more and more confident. That really resonates with me. Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to share about your journey?
Just to say that don't be too hard on ourselves. Yes, having a career is always good, but having fun along the way is more important. Life is too short to fix a goal and to say I want to be there no matter what. But I do think enjoy the people and enjoy the fun, learning the challenges along the way is equally, if not more important. Life is too short and do not have fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I was reading something the other day which really resonated to me, and it was talking about like what a measure of success should be as like a balanced measure of success. You know, are my family okay? Am I seeing my friends? Am I looking after myself physically? Am I finding space to like spiritually connect with things that make me feel valid outside of work? And I think that is really important. And I think it's very neglected, especially when you start out. You think pedal to the metal and you don't think that, you know, also taking care of yourself is a measure of success. And the leaders I admire, like yourself, have a holistic approach to what it means to be successful. And I think that's very important.
Yeah, and it's personal. How each individual defines success is personal, but we've got to define that for ourselves.
Absolutely. Oh, well, it's always such a pleasure to speak with you. I'm so happy that you are in your new role in Switzerland and thriving. And I just wish you so much luck with it. And thank you so much for being part of our Ask a CFO series.
Thank you for having me, Sophie, always.
So thank you so much to Yang for taking part in our Ask a CFO series. I really hope that you're all inspired by her journey and will take away some implementable advice. So stay tuned and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from. As now we've launched, we're going to be regularly releasing further episodes with an array of different CFOs located across the world. Thank you so much for being part of our audience today, and please do join us again.